All right. This is the Story Series podcast where we tell the stories behind the people. And today in the studio, we have Joey Clift. Welcome,
Yeah.
Joey.
Yeah. How's it going, Brandon? How's it going, everybody? Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk.
You're a comedian, a screenwriter, a filmmaker, and I want to get into all that. But I love to start with just origin stories. And so if you could tell me, where did you grow up?
So I grew up on the Tulalip Reservation in Washington State. Kind of my origin story is I'm a Native American, enrolled Cowlitz, and growing up, I really loved shows like The Simpsons, Family Guy, and a lot of like kids cartoons. But because I didn't see any Native comedians on TV, I didn't think I was like allowed to work in comedy. So instead, I went to school for what to me felt like the next best thing, and that's to be like a small market weather guy. Because I felt like, those people that like, crack jokes about the weather on TV, that felt like the most attainable way that I could like, get paid to make people laugh. And fortunately, my professors kind of pulled me aside when I was in college and were like, hey, you could just work in the entertainment industry, right? And I was like, what, really? That's kind of the short version of it. But
Growing up, would you describe yourself, were you always an especially creative child? Like, did you always want to, gravitate towards comedy and that kind of?
yeah, I think that I was somebody who I was always like the sarcastic kid in the back of the class. I wouldn't define myself as like a class clown because I feel like the class clown is the kid who's like jumping on tables and screaming or whatever. I feel like I was just the kid who like would quietly sit in the back of the class, say sarcastic jokes to the people next to me, and they would laugh about it. And I think that that's just something that I like felt a lot of really great feedback toward when I was younger, especially like, growing up, I was like always kind of a scrawny kid and not super athletic, especially kind of growing up in a small town where like athletics was a big part of it. That was kind of just my way to stand out. And then I remember really gravitating toward when I was like, in elementary school, like, not being great at math, not being great at like history, but like when we had creative writing exercises, feeling like, oh, I'm really good at this and I'm like getting A's on this. This feels like a thing I should maybe pursue, just sort of like your first bit of like positive reinforcement when you're creative of like, oh, this feels like something that I might have an aptitude for,
When did Weatherman enter the picture?
So how did Weatherman enter the picture? So originally, growing up, I was a really big gamer. I loved video games. And I took like a computer programming class when I was in like middle school or something like that. And I was immediately bad at it and didn't like it. So I was like, oh, maybe that's not a thing that I want to do for a living. And then I kind of like poked around sort of the basic, and this was in, sixth, seventh grade of like, oh, maybe drama, acting. Like I love all of these comedies. Like maybe working in this field is something that makes sense to me. I took like an acting class, a drama class when I was 10 or something like that. And like that also felt like something that like, wasn't quite it. And then I remember just there was this really great local weather person in Seattle called Steve Poole. And he was somebody that like he legitimately was like a big local hero, and he was so good nationally that he kind of became Al Roker's like replacement guy whenever Al Roker would like be sick or something like that. And he was just like a nice, like funny, like personality driven weather guy who was clearly like he was clearly the guy on the local news that got to have fun, and the local news I remember being like, after Simpsons reruns every day or whatever. So I think I associated that with like, okay, like of all the like clearly I like making people laugh. Hollywood seems so far away, and I don't have like relatives that work in the industry or anything like that. But like being a TV weather person feels like the version of this that makes sense to me to like make money, I took this drama class, didn't like it. My school had something called the morning announcements, which I'm not sure if your school had it, but it's like essentially like a 5-minute long news program that was like anchored by students. Like you would take the morning announcements class where it was basically like a high school TV production class. So like, we had a news desk set up. We would do these, reports where the news stories were just like homecoming tickets are on sale this week or whatever. And there was like a sports guy who'd cover like the school's sports, and there was a weather guy. And I took the class because I remember watching it with friends. It was like a required watch at the end of second period. Class would end 5 minutes early so everybody could watch these announcements. And I remember it just not being good. And it was kind of something that, because these are all high school students who don't know how to be on camera. A lot of people commenting about like, oh yeah, this is bad. This is just like not great. And me like watching it and thinking like, yeah, this does suck, but like I think I could do better. So I signed up for this class, and was probably like a little bit too funny. So the teacher never put me on camera. But there was one day where the regular weather guy just like had laryngitis, or like he like lost his voice like 5 minutes before we were supposed to go on air. And I was the only person in the class who like wasn't really doing anything. So he was just like, Joey, do you want to like fill in for me? So I like put on an oversized button-up shirt, the one that everybody shared, put on a tie, got on camera, and just like, cracked jokes and was really loose. And I remember like after class, walking from that class to my next class, having literally like students at my high school where I'm like the shy kid that nobody talks to, like grabbing me and saying like, "Were you the weather guy? You're so funny." And like that was just such a burst of like positive reinforcement that was like, I think that was kind of the moment of like, oh yeah, maybe like being a weather guy, I see all these funny weather guys on TV. I was just a funny weather guy for my high school. Maybe that's like something that I could do as like a career.
Yeah, that's when you start to get that kind of like praise or positive feedback from people you don't know, then suddenly it's like, oh, wait a minute, this is a little bit of like paradigm shifting in terms of the way you think. It's not just friends anymore. It's like, hey, these people that walk right past me are now like, hey, aren't you the guy?
Yeah, it's just a weird, like, it's really difficult to explain to people who are not in the entertainment industry, but it's like a drug, and I need more, baby.
Yes. So okay, so that's high school, and then as you're getting ready to decide where to go to college, what was that decision process like? Did you stay close to home? Did you leave?
So after I graduated high school, I went to community college, just kind of one town over from where I grew up, and at that point, I still wasn't necessarily sure. Like, I had this great experience being, the weatherman for my high school's, TV station. But that didn't necessarily manifest toward me in the idea of like, oh, I should go to college to be a weather guy. So, I would say that like while in community college, I kind of like meandered around. I like was a DJ for my like kind of local town volunteer radio station. I did like stand-up comedy a little bit in Seattle. I like, hosted events at the community college, things that kind of put me, on stage and on camera whenever I kind of got the opportunity. And then I remember there was a transfer fair for the community college students where all the different colleges or universities from the state kind of, came and had tables set up and basically tried to convince you to transfer to their college as opposed to some other college. And I was talking to somebody at the Washington State University desk about their program. It's apparently where Edward R. Murrow went to college, in the 1940s or something like that. They have a really respected broadcast news program, and they also have like a fantastic student-run TV station, like a college TV station. And, I think that for me, that just kind of clicked into place. Also, like my grandfather went there and like he was an alumni. So I think that kind of clicked into place of like, oh, I think Washington State University is a place that I can get a degree to be like a TV news reporter, which I could probably translate into being a weather guy. And there's also this great college TV station that I could just dive in with both feet and just do that to like figure out whatever this mess of what I want to do with my life is,
Yes. Well, I want to touch on the community college for a second because I also went to community college.
Oh, great.
So out of high school, I went directly to College of the Canyons here in Santa Clarita.
Oh, nice. Yeah, community college is great, right?
I love it. I mean, first you save a lot of money.
Yeah.
And you have time to kind of figure it out. At the same time, I was like studying graphic design and like art classes and cinema classes. And
I took like a singing class because I was like, maybe a musician. Maybe that at the time I was in a bad rap metal band. We were called Manrantula because half man, half tarantula, all rap.
That's a series actually. That would be a great Manrantula. The community college path, I think, is when other people I learn do the same thing, I'm just like, that's awesome.
What I love about community college is I think that when I went to university, I would talk to, like other kids and other students about like, and they would say things like, wow, it's like such a diverse campus. There's people who are like of all different like backgrounds here. But it's like, to be able to afford to go to university, you're probably around a similar socioeconomic background, and you're probably all, age 18 to 25 or something like that. Whereas you go to community college and it's like, you'll have a class with a 16-year-old running start student and like a 60-year-old, like old steel worker who just wants to do a career change. It truly is like diversity of experience to people that go to community college because it's cheaper, and it's, I really cannot say enough good things about my community college experience, you know?
Yeah. And so at this time, you mentioned you were doing some stand-up comedy. You were in a band. So stand-up comedy, what was that like for you? You're writing your own jokes at this point,
Yeah.
right?
So this was in my early 20s. And I think it was I want to say it was like what I did on my 21st birthday or something like that. Because that was, a lot of comedy clubs are 21 over. So I drove like at the time like a 1990 Geo Metro that like rattled when I drove it. So like just making the drive was treacherous. Like everybody else who was doing this open mics were like in their, 40s and 50s and like just jaded in a way that stand-ups in Seattle, I'm sure, are when you're that age. And it's like it kind of felt, or people that had been doing it for a while without a ton of success, so they like hated everybody young. So it was like it was intimidating, but it really felt like, I don't know. It was like, there are some times that I went up where I was really funny. There are some times that I went up where I was just where I like bombed or whatever. But it kind of felt like, oh, I'm going on an adventure doing this. This is like, nerve-wracking, a big deal. Like, it's expensive to drive there. I'm scared that my car is going to make it, if my car is going to make it or not.
In those early sets with presumably no real writing experience
Yeah.
just community college, high school, what was your comedic voice like? What was the style of your humor?
So it was the sort of thing where I like, it wasn't about, like, I would say that my voice was like essentially me trying to kind of like ape the weird alt comedy stuff that I saw growing up.
Yeah, who did you like?
I mean, people like Conan O'Brien, The Simpsons, like The State on MTV was a big touch point for me. So like I feel like my big closer was like a joke about how when I had kids, I wanted to irradiate them so they could be superheroes. And it's like, it's kind of funny, but it's also like, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, I'm glad that I thought that was funny. But also, why was that my closer? Why was that my big finish to my set?
Yeah. Okay. And then were you going up at the time with friends? Did you have anyone around you that you would go with, or did you just kind of?
No, I mean, that was one of the things that was so scary about it is like I had a lot of friends who were funny, but I didn't necessarily, and I had a lot of friends that like wanted to try comedy, but it's like, there's a difference between being like the funny person at the D&D table versus being the person that's like, there's an open mic in Seattle at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday, and it's going to be an hour and a half drive. And like, I'm going to have to watch a lot of bad comedy because it's an open mic. And then I'm going to get home at 1, like it's just, especially something like that, when you're especially driving so far out of your way. It wasn't like, you live in Los Angeles and there's an open mic 2 blocks over that you can just walk over to. It was like, no, like even getting to it was an adventure. Like, yeah, I didn't really have anybody in my life at that time that was like, pursuing it in that way, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. At that time, did you feel like you got the bug for that? Like, even though you would kind of bomb sometimes or do well, you kept going back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it's like I wouldn't necessarily say that I got the stand-up bug from that, but I think that, and this is kind of how I feel about a lot of, this entertainment industry, creative storytelling path, is like, I think it's important to try a lot of things, and you might like 10% of this thing, and then that 10% that you like from stand-up, and maybe you hate 90% of it, you'll take that 10% and try to apply that to, doing improv. And then maybe you like 5% of doing improv. And then you take that 15% and bring it to writing for kids TV. And then maybe you like 50% of that. And then you have this 75% that you take to something else. And it's like, so I think that for me, it's like what I liked about stand-up was the part where I got to, get on stage and make people laugh. At the time, what I didn't like about stand-up was like it kind of something for me that was such a big turnoff in stand-up was I remember there was a guy that was telling a joke about like Lenny Kravitz that was really funny, a joke about him meeting Lenny Kravitz or something like that. And like after his set, I like walked up to him and I was like, that was so funny. Like, wow, did you really meet Lenny Kravitz or whatever? And he like did this and he got in close and then he whispered in my ear, no, I made it up. And for me, it was like somebody told me that like Santa isn't real, you know,
Yeah.
where it's just like, oh, like you liar. Like, you know, I think that something that I love about comedy and storytelling is when you can put a little bit of truthfulness to it, or a little bit of like your personal story or your personal experiences. And I think that I saw in my time in doing open mics in Seattle, a lot of people that were doing that, where it's just like, oh, you're just like lying on stage. And yeah, your jokes are funny, but it's like it takes away the stakes and the honesty if you're completely just making this up. Because then why are you telling this joke, you know?
Yeah, then they're all a little bit interchangeable to some degree.
Yeah, it's just like hack, you know?
Then at that point, are you also playing in a band? Where does Man
Ranchula.
Man Ranchula come in? And
So,
what instrument did you play?
Okay, so I was this was when new metal was big. I was the rapper. I was not a good rapper. And the rest of the other members of the band, I was friends with a lot of people like who were industrial musicians, like, you know, like people like, you know, that are big fans of like Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and Skinny Puppy and stuff like that. And I was just sort of their like positive, goofy friend when they're like all wearing black and smoking cigarettes. I'm just like, oh man, the show Happy Days is cool. I love Garfield or whatever. But you know, we got along really well because we all loved video games. But so yeah, we were like a rap metal band. I was the rapper. And we played a few shows, mainly like one of them, as often happens with bands in small towns, literally just like built a stage into their garage. So we would do like garage shows for, you know, like 50 or 60 of their friends who were also in bands who would also play kind of around the local scene. And yeah, I would say that this is around when I'm like in community college, you know, doing stand up, you know, DJing this you know, local radio station, radio show, and just sort of, you know, I think like knowing that I wanted to work in comedy, but not understanding that that's a very broad umbrella, and kind of just trying a lot of stuff and seeing and just kind of continuing to do the things that I liked and then not doing the things that I didn't like, you know?
Sure. You're just kind of finding it at that point.
Yeah, you're just
searching.
trying stuff.
Right. And so are you still in community college at this point? When
Yeah.
did you transfer?
So I'm still in community college at this point, and then when I graduated, I you know decided that Washington State University would be a really great place to go because they had the really amazing broadcast news program and also this really great college TV station. And I remember like I didn't even tour the campus. I literally just, one of my friends from community college was also transferring there, and she toured the campus, and I was like, "Did it seem cool?" And she was like, "Yeah, it seemed fine." And I'm like, "Okay, that's all I need." And when I drove to campus for the first time, it was across the state. I grew up in Western Washington. Washington State University is far eastern Washington, like really, really close to the Idaho border. And like when I got to campus, I went to the offices of the college TV station before I went to my dorm for the first time. It was that level of like, this is why I'm here, you know?
And what kind of reception did you get?
I think that people were excited that I was optimistic and wanted to do it.
Optimistic.
Yeah. I think it was one of those things where it was probably like, oh wow, that's cool that this kid's into it. Also, this kid's very into it.
Maybe too into it.
Yeah, I think that people liked it, but it's also like, you know, it's like, it was for me, like, especially transfer. I think that, did you transfer to a university from community
to
college?
CSUN. And
Cool.
Like you, I mean, I had one choice, like one you know, application I submitted after COC.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I toured the campus. I had probably gone there as a kid for some event, you know.
Yeah.
But I was like, no, this is the path, and I'm sure I'll get in because it's CSUN, and
Yeah.
you know, it is what you make it.
Yeah, but I guess that like, I think that what I think is really great about community college is that you're erasing the first 2 years of figuring out what you want to do with your life. So I think that, and I'd be curious to hear if this is your experiences of like, when you transferred, you probably immediately were like, well, this is the major that I want. This is the thing that I want to do. There's not quite as much figuring out. You're a little bit more laser focused than if you're 18 and doing it.
100%. I transferred there with 2 years left. I got out exactly 2 years.
Oh, great.
But in community college, you know, you're supposed to be there for 2 years.
Yeah.
I was there for like 4. I graduated high school a semester early because I was taking classes at the same time in my like junior and senior year. And then I like made up for that early high school graduation with a longer community college
Oh.
of winding, trying to figure it out. And then once I figured it out, boom, CSUN, screenwriting major, film major, and I was out in 2 years. Then I was focused.
I mean, good for you. So my path was I graduated from high school and I actually took a year off between high school and community college because there still was that thing of like figuring out like, okay, is college even a thing that I want to go to? And then, I think I just played video games for 18 hours a day for like 2 months. And then at a certain point I was like, is this what I want to do with my life?
I took a year off during community college
Oh.
too, before transferring to university. So I went from high school to community college, a couple years, took a year off thinking, is this even what I wanted to do? Is this going to help me
No,
in
that
any
makes
way?
sense. Yeah. So like I took a year off, started community college when I was 19, and then I took like 2.5 years in community college because I was I was basically like having a good time doing it. Like I was like the concerts and fine arts coordinator for the college, so I was like planning events and that was another really nice thing is I would like book comedians, and then after their shows I would like talk to them about like how do you do comedy, And then after I graduated, I took another 6 months before I transferred to university because I graduated in like the winter, and the transfer for university is usually the fall. And then university, I think I took 3 years instead of 2 years because I just fortunately had like scholarships paying for it. And I really wanted to do a lot of college TV to get like a good reel together for when I eventually did whatever the next thing was. And I was just really involved in like clubs and different things. And I made like a bad college film. And I kind of wanted to do like 3/4 loads every quarter semester and then use that extra time to, just try creative stuff.
What do you do when you're close to graduating? How are you kind of thinking about your life post-college?
So it wasn't until I honestly, for my 3 years at university, I was still pretty laser focused on the being a TV weather guy path. And basically what happened was while I was doing that, I did a lot of college TV, a lot of comedy shows, a lot of hosting things. And I did that with the attitude that like, this is going to help me for my future reporting the weather in like Post Falls, Idaho or whatever, this is on camera and on stage experience. And a college TV show that I wrote, produced, and co-starred in ended up winning like a national college comedy award, beating out Ivy League schools like Harvard, Ithaca, and other places. And I remember like holding this trophy and thinking like, oh, this is going to look really cool on my news desk. In like, and this is when a bunch of my professors, this was very close to graduating, were saying like, hey, like you should work in comedy. That's like, it's like, I think a quote from a professor was like, you could get a job reporting the news or the weather in a small town. That's a path that you could pursue for sure. But your like potential for growth is probably way higher in comedy, And so I had an internship set up, like a study abroad internship set up in London. And I was going to, this was my like final, like, holding off entering into the real world. Like I'm going to take out some student loans and go be in London for a while because I've always wanted to do a study abroad. And I had an internship set up with CBS News Radio, the same place where Edward R. Murrow reported World War II from like, it's like the same building, to at the last minute, literally after I landed in London, saying like, could you switch me to like a comedy internship, which I'm sure was maddening for that internship coordinator. But they, really hustled and got me an internship interning for a place called Baby Cow Productions, which they created shows like The Mighty Boosh, Gavin and Stacey, where James Corden got his start. Steve Coogan was the co-founder, and he's a big guy in British comedy.
For sure.
Yeah, and
what's his famous Alan
Partridge? Yeah,
yes.
that's.
Is he a newscaster? That character?
Yeah, his character is he's like a newscaster in a small town or something like that.
Okay.
And that was my first time really, I would say, working with people who do comedy for a living, people who actually do it, not random stand-ups in Seattle or whatever. People where it's like, oh, you're in your mid-50s and your job for the past 30 years has been doing BBC shows and doing Edinburgh Fringe shows and like executive producing great cult British comedy shows and stuff like that. And I remember what a very big turning point for me was after all of these sort of like sparks of like, maybe this is a thing I should pursue, is Henry Normal, the co-executive producer, founder of the company, who was like a big underground British comedian in like the 90s. He was in the office all the time. It was kind of a slow season. And there were maybe 4 or 5 other people in the office. And I just sent him an email like while I was, sitting at my intern desk being like, "Hey, Henry, it's me, Joey, the intern from America. If you have a couple minutes, I'd love to talk to you about comedy, at some point in the next couple of weeks. If not, it's okay."
Yeah.
And he like,
I've sent those emails.
yeah. And it's like literally we're in an office he's like
Right.
20 feet from me. And he like got up, tapped me on the shoulder, invited me to his office, and then just like talked to me about comedy for like 2 hours about like his background, his life. And, he worked in an office until he was 25. And then he saw the movie Animal House and saw that people were having fun for a living, and then realized that, oh, that's a thing that he could do too. So then he like moved in with his sister and slept on his sister's couch for 3 years while like writing jokes and going to open mics. And, it just really spoke to me. And he said, the advice that he said is that like he learned that it was possible to have fun for a living. And for me, that was like such the light bulb of like, yeah, that's like whatever the thing is, that's the thing that I want. I've been like dancing around all these different things, but like that is sort of the focus. And that is a thought that really carried me into, moving to Los Angeles and diving into, this industry is like, oh, I want to have fun for a living. He also gave really good advice of, and as I'm sure, you relate and anybody watching this can relate that works in the industry. It's a very uncertain industry. It's not the sort of place or it's not the sort of industry where you're like working at the same factory for 30 years or whatever. And he gave me the advice of like, yeah, you got to like learn to love the uncertainty. And it's not until you are capable of doing that you like really are able to work in this industry, because if you don't, you're just going to like be a stress bomb at all times because you have no idea what your next gig is going to be,
Yeah, you have to embrace that uncertainty. And when you embrace it, I think there comes a certain level of calm or almost relaxation a bit. And then if you can achieve that, I think that's when you can have fun. But if you're a stress ball, like you said, you can't have fun and that at the same time. You have to let go a little bit.
Yeah. It's like you have to, and it takes a while. Like it took me probably my first couple of years in Los Angeles. It wasn't until like maybe I'd been here for like 5 or 6 years that I was like, oh yeah, like I wrapped this job, another job will come. Like it's like I don't know where it's going to be, but at some point I'll get an email from somebody who needs a writer or whatever.
Yeah.
But it is something that it's really tough to tell that to like a college student or a recent college grad, because it's sort of like you got to pay your bills and rent, but also when you're working, save money so that you're not stressed. But like, don't worry, just be nice and be cool, and jobs will come.
Right, and this is the best part of your life. So
Also, it doesn't get better than this. So enjoy it. Like,
yeah, I remember an early boss that I had, who was a head writer on Tots at the time, Guy Tobis.
Oh, cool.
I was working on a freelance and I was asking him some story questions, and I think he could tell I was a little nervous, because I was still like, just a little up and comer and getting my, first couple shots, and then at the end of the conversation, he's like, oh yeah. And, you having fun?
Yeah.
I go, oh yeah. Yeah. And that really stayed with me, because it's like, all that other stuff is important, but don't forget this other important part, which is why we're here. We're having fun for a living.
Well, yeah, it's like, why did you, and why did you, meaning you and also anybody watching this, like, why did you decide to follow this weird, insane career path? Presumably because you like doing it. It probably wasn't to get rich, because this is not the way to do that. For some people, yes, but like for most people, no, that's not. It's like you do it because you like it.
Yes. And so how long did you spend in London?
I was in London for like, I want to say 4 or 5 months. It was like like a summer internship study abroad, and then I because I was in Europe and in my 20s at the time, I want to say it was like 2 weeks before I was supposed to like fly back to the States. I was like, I'm going to push back my flight a month and backpack Europe, which is a very like, pardon my French, but a very like asshole college student thing to do.
Do it. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I backpacked Europe for a month, and I did like just what's called like the Grand Tour, which is the one like Aristocrats did, which is like London to France to Spain to Italy. And then I was like I think I went from there to like the Czech Republic to Poland to Germany to Belgium. I was in Hungary too, and then like back to London. So I just did kind of a loop. And it was, I think that like, that was kind of my last, like, okay, I'm doing this before I'm like entering the world properly. And, I can't say that taught me a lot about storytelling, but it taught me a lot about like living.
For sure, for sure. I had an experience studying abroad too, and I remember
Where'd you study abroad?
I was in Beijing, China.
Oh, cool.
And so this was after CSUN. That was another way of like delaying entering the
Yeah,
real
100%,
world.
100%. Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm close to graduating. I have a couple of feature specs
Yeah,
and some
yeah.
meetings, and I can't seem, I can't figure out how this will be a job. And so maybe I'll get my master's.
Yeah.
And then this like random China email came, and I was like, I'm doing China. And it was at a film school out there, but more than like improving my writing, it was like, oh, if I'm a broader person, I'll be a better writer.
Yeah.
And I feel like backpacking around, getting out of your comfort zone like that is just serving you as a person. And then however you want to, direct that into comedy or whatever, it will, translate.
Yeah, when this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier about being like really being turned off from stand up when I was in community college, in hearing that so many stand ups just like are making up these stories and saying they really happened, is like, no, like what makes you good is like living a life. And it's like you're going to be a really boring writer if all you do is write. You're going to be a really boring comedian if all you do is write jokes. Because at a certain point, what are you writing about? What are you writing jokes about? And like, it's so much of what you're being hired for is your point of view, and you're only going to really develop your point of view by like living. I think that is, it's important to, I'm not to say like it's important to like go screw off and hang out in China for a couple months or backpack Europe or whatever, because like, that's expensive, but it is important just to like do stuff and get out of your comfort zone. And that when you've been stranded in a foreign country with no idea how to get home for a couple of days, it makes pitching jokes in a writer's room so much easier. Like,
well, that's a really good point. It increases your fear tolerance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like, I'm not going to die if this joke doesn't land. Yeah.
I remember I had that moment where I was there, and it kind of hit me that like, oh yeah, if I was in the valley and in trouble, my mom and dad can come.
Yeah.
If I'm here, it's at least 15 hours. No one will care if I die here. Like, and my parents can't come to help me if, and so that's a good feeling.
Yeah. For me, it's like, I remember specifically I was in Barcelona, Spain, and I'm not rich. I definitely grew up without very much money. So like for me, backpacking Europe was definitely like, oh, I'm staying in like hostels where I'm in a room with 16 other people. I think the only thing that I ate for like that entire month was like bread, because it was like, that's free at hostels. Right. It's like I was definitely doing it the cheapest, like I'm a college student for sure. I got bed bugs from this experience way possible. And I remember I was in a train station in Barcelona, and this is like I did not have an iPhone at the time, and this was like right around when iPhones came out, and they were just too fancy for me. And so the way that I was able to tell the train schedule, I just did like Eurail train, was through what's called like a Thomas Cook train guide, which is just like a book that you can buy every year that's like, here are all the train times and days in all of Europe for the next year or whatever. And I remember like, basically like plotting out my route, knowing which trains I was going to take. So after I'd been in Barcelona for a day or two, I, already had a hostel booked in like, I think I was going to stay in Florence. Like I was going to take the train to Florence. And I was like, so I went to the Barcelona train station to buy my ticket to Florence. And they basically like said to me like, oh, that train doesn't run anymore. Or like, I pointed to the guide, and I'm like, no, it says right here. It's like, it says it runs. And like, also they didn't speak English. I didn't speak Spanish. Right. So I was trying to figure out in like, with a huge language barrier, how do I get to where I need to go?
Yeah.
And my response to this, after kind of realizing that there wasn't really a way that I was going to be able to like leave that day to go to Florence, I just like sat on the wood bench of this train station and just kind of like pouted for like 10 minutes. I'm just like, oh, I'm mad. And then I like, eventually it clicked in after about 10 minutes of like, oh, I'm like stranded in a country where I don't know anybody. I don't speak the language. I don't have like very much money. Like, me pouting on this bench is not going to keep me from like dying tonight, And I think that for me was that's like something that you can only experience through going through that.
Sure. And it's something so simple too. Like, who
Yeah.
doesn't know how to take the train if they're a local, but for
Yeah.
us, for an outsider, it's like, it's a huge,
Yeah, and
huge
it's like,
thing.
I don't know anybody in this country. Yeah, my parents, like, I guess we'll be called to pick up the body if I die.
Right.
So it's like, it's just like that. Yeah, it's you experience that just from like living,
Yeah. So when you're traveling around, how are you keeping yourself busy at this time? Are you reading any books? Are you kind of writing any observations, or what are you doing
Yeah,
on your
I like
downtime?
So I journaled. Yeah, I would say that's pretty much it. Yeah, like I journaled, and then I just like went and saw stuff and did stuff, and like I don't know. I was an annoying part of this is that I was at this point I was finishing up a student film that I made, and as often happens when you make student films, is like our editor wasn't very reliable because it's like that's the work where you actually have to make the thing.
Right.
So it was like a mix of journaling, just being like, oh, I'm in Paris. I'm just gonna like, I'm gonna go to the Louvre. I'm gonna go like, like I'll have like a baguette from Paris because I've never had that. I was in like Naples, Italy, and I'm like, this is where pizza was invented. I'm gonna have some street pizza.
Right.
I'm gonna go to like Pompeii and just walk around Pompeii for a day. You know.
And reading guidebooks, right? Because this is before an iPhone.
Yeah,
so you're not just on your phone passing the time. You're actually having to like.
Yeah, that was such a beautiful part of it. That is like
Right.
I had like like a Rick Steves travel guide,
Yeah.
and like I had like a rough guide to Europe, and I had this Thomas Cook trade guide, all in like a small backpack with like one change of clothes that I like just never changed out of. I just layered up because it was like snowing in parts and it was hot in other parts, and yeah, it was like whenever I was on a train, it would be like, well, it's 10 hours to get from, like from Naples to Venice. So like, I guess I'll just take this table and like lay out this map, lay out this train guide, lay out this thing, literally like circle things that I want to do, draw literally like the route that I was going to think that I thought I was going to take. And then just like, okay, how do I say like, hello, where's the bathroom in German? And it was just this little like video game battle stations thing of just having like several books open with a highlighter.
Yeah.
And just like, okay, like, like where am I going to stay? Like, like it's like, what's the hour? Where's the hostel as it relates to the train station? Like, is there a hotel nearby? Cause like I couldn't afford to stay in hotels, but if you go to a hotel, every hotel has a map of the area. So I'd go there and get like, a map of Paris, a map of Belgium, a map of whatever, and then use that to kind of like triangulate like, okay, I have, like once I land, I have a place that I'm sleeping. I've got the key to that. I have food. Like I have, I have my train ticket out of the place. I started buying in advance once I learned from Barcelona.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, now that I've got those basic like video game check boxes figured out, now I can figure out like, oh, okay, what's like cool to do here? Like, oh, what's like, I'm in Berlin. I'm going to go to the Berlin Wall. Like it's just all that kind of stuff.
And was there a particular city or just a spot that you experienced that kind of still stays with you?
So yeah, I think that the whole experience stays with me in a lot of ways. I would say that specifically, have you ever been to Venice, Italy?
No.
So what's cool about Venice, Italy is it's built literally on logs that are on the water because it's like a city on the water. Because it's built on the water, there aren't streets. And it's a lot of small islands. So instead of having a bus or a taxi, you take boats everywhere. So it's literally like you'll go to a bus stop, and instead of a bus pulling up, it's like a boat that you'll get onto. It'll take you, 3 stops over or whatever. And another really great thing about Venice is the entire city like kind of rocks like a boat, like a little bit because it's on the water. And it's something that I've just like never experienced anywhere else. And it's like I always tell this to people who travel of like, you got to experience that in your life of just like it's wild to be on what feels like land. You're in a building, but the entire building just like is like rocking a little bit,
Wow.
So that's something that's like going to stick with me. And then, yeah, other than that, like there's just a lot of little moments of like being in a hostel and running into another American and like not having anything in common other than we're both from America and we can talk about like America drama we saw on Reddit. And I remember I was like talking to this American guy and he ordered a pizza. And he was like, this was in, I want to say it was like probably like Berlin or something like that. I was, in this hostel. He ordered a pizza, and I was like about to like head to the train station, and we were talking about like Sarah Palin or whatever was in the news at that time or whatever. And he stopped me and he was like, "Hey man, take half the pizza." And I was like, "Whoa!" And I literally he was like, "Yeah man, I'm not going to finish this. It's yours." And so he literally gave me I folded up this pizza. I think I put it in like a newspaper or something like that and put it in this backpack and like ate this pizza for like probably a day straight, And it's just like those like beautiful moments of humanity that where it's like, oh, truly like we're, it's just living, and it's like human connections that you're not necessarily going to make driving to work every day.
That's a good point. I mean, here, if someone gave you half a pizza, you'd be like, "Oh, okay, thanks."
Yeah,
but
it's like, I'm not sure I have room in my refrigerator.
Exactly.
But
Totally.
if like a complete stranger who you talk to for 3 minutes does that, you're like, you saved my life, bro.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And so now your time in London and your time backpacking is coming to an end. What are you thinking now? Again, post college life, post internship. How are you feeling about kind of entering like the quote unquote real world?
So I moved back in with my parents for a couple months, as I was waiting for my diploma to get mailed to me, because at that point it felt like it was official that I graduated, And once I got that, it was a lot of phone coffees and phone calls with alumni from Washington State University who moved to Los Angeles. WSU doesn't really have a film program, but because the college TV station is so great, there's a lot of alumni from WSU who move down here and work in, reality TV and kind of hidden camera prank shows and animation and stuff like that.
And what was your degree in exactly?
It was communications with a broadcast news emphasis.
Okay.
And then a double minor in English and philosophy.
Okay.
And so I basically just had a lot of phone conversations with people who worked in the entertainment industry, asking like the kind of questions that a college student would ask. That's just like, wow, what's it like? Is it good? Kind of like dipping my toe in the water. And then finally I got what forced me to like move is I was talking to somebody who was a graduate from my college, like 10 years prior or whatever. And he said what I'm sure a lot of people hear when they want to work in the entertainment industry but don't live in Los Angeles is like, yeah, to get jobs, you have to be here. Like it's, if somebody wants to hire a PA on a series, they're not going to like hire a PA from Colorado and like wait for them to move here. It's like, we're shooting tomorrow, dude. So I talked to somebody on the phone, and it was and he said like, "Oh yeah, you seem really nice. I have a friend who's working on a show that's looking for office PAs. I can put you up for it if you want, but you like have to be here to do the job and interview and stuff. Like you have to do the interview in person. You can't do it over the phone." So that for me was the tell of like, oh, it's in 2 weeks. Okay, well, I guess I got to move to Los Angeles in 2 weeks. And fortunately, I drove to Los Angeles, did not get the job. But my brother at the time lived here. He doesn't work in the industry. He just is like a car mechanic, and he got offered like a nice car mechanic job in like Inglewood or something.
Oh, nice.
And so I had like a place to land. I could crash on his couch for, a couple months while I figured it out. And
it's good to know someone who has a stable-ish job compared to entertainment. Like he's not also in entertainment. He's a car mechanic. That's comparatively a little more.
For sure. Yeah, he's not waiting for to see how the ratings do on the latest car or whatever.
Right. Yes. Okay.
He's not hoping that Toyota gets picked up for another season.
Yes, exactly. So you didn't get that job, but what did that do to you? How did you feel about that? Were you happy that you're here? Were you like, I did it? Or was that kind of stinging?
I mean, at that point, it's like I was basically running on the fumes of the whatever student loans I still had left in my bank account, student loan money I had left in my bank account. And so I think that it was like, okay, I got 5 weeks. I got 5 weeks till I run out of money, and, have to move back home or whatever. And so I, while I was also waiting for this job interview, I was like hitting the pavement, getting coffee with like every recent graduate alumni that I knew down here. And fortunately, I had a lot of friends who were like, production coordinators, assistants, executives, different places.
And how are you finding them? What were your networking tools back then?
So this was kind of the magic of, and this was not by design, but by me sticking around and doing college TV for 3 years and not graduating in 2 years. I made friends with like everybody who was also doing college TV at the time. So it was like people that graduated, a year before me, 2 years before me, who I, hosted a college TV show they produced or something like that, just remembered me. And if I said I moved to LA and wanted to get coffee with them, they were down to do that. And because I made that college TV show that won a big National College Comedy Award, like WSU's college TV station is the sort of thing that alumni like kind of pay attention to. So I remember I was at like a symposium event that my college puts on every year, which is basically an excuse to bring alumni back to the college to, talk to them about what it's like working in the entertainment industry or news or whatever. And there was like at the symposium, somebody grabbed me from behind, whipped me around, and it was like a guy in his probably mid-40s, and he said, "You're the guy!" And I was like, "What? What's happening? Am I gonna get like beat up or something?" And then he like grabbed another dude in his 40s and said, "That's the guy!" And then like I was like, "What?" And then they were like, "You're the guy who made the funny college TV show," because they like were there, the night before, and they happened to turn on the college TV show when my show was airing on college TV. They happened to turn on the college TV station, and they just thought it was funny and thought it was ambitious and thought it was cool. So they like were like, "We're going to sit down with lunch with you and tell you everything that there is to know about the entertainment industry." And it turned out that this was at this point a vice president of the E! Network and one of the producers on a show called Scare Tactics on Sci-Fi with Tracy Morgan.
Oh yeah.
And basically like they sat me down, gave me a lot of really great advice. And, they also, once I graduated, kind of gave me the advice of like, well, you have to move to LA. But once I moved to LA, like I would get coffee with people like that, alumni that I'd done stuff with. And also like, and I would always say like, "Oh, thanks so much for meeting with me. Keep me in mind if you have any, like, if you know anybody looking for an assistant or whatever. Also, is there anybody else who you think would get coffee with me?"
Nice.
And, that just allowed me to kind of build sort of a train of like, like every day or every other day I would have a coffee with like some random person. And it was like, somebody who was like a sound guy for soap operas, somebody who like was the assistant for somebody who does like drama features, somebody who is like, an international business exec for a TV for like, the E! Network or whatever, who like can't get me a job in what I want to do, but they just like live in the entertainment industry and can explain to me what a life is here. And I just did that enough that like after my third week here, like somebody that I got coffee with gave me a call and said, "Hey, are you still looking for assistant work? Because a friend of mine like just lost their assistant and they're looking for an assistant." And then, I said, "Oh yeah, sure." And then within 5 minutes, I got a call from the executive in charge of the Scare Tactics production company saying, "Hey, we just fired our assistant. We're looking for a new assistant. Are you free to interview today?" And it was like 11, and he was like, "Is 1 o'clock good?" And I'm like, "I live in Inglewood, and this is Studio City, but like, I guess." Also, all of my normal clothes are dirty, so I'm wearing this insane like corduroy pants, like cardigan, like weird get up. So I drove there, interviewed, and then we just hit it off, and they liked me, so they called me. This was on a Friday. They called me at like 4 p.m. to say like, "You're hired. Can you start Monday?" So it went from panicking and having no idea that this job existed at 11 a.m. to interviewing for it at 1 to getting hired at 4 to starting the following Monday,
That speaks to what you're saying, or what you were told was that no one's going to call you in Washington and say, "Hey, we got an opening. Can you come down here in 2 hours?" You have to already be here to get that last minute phone call of, "Hey, this guy's not working out. What do you, can you come
100%. Yeah. It's like, it is very much like, yeah, if they wouldn't say like, "We just fired our assistant. Oh, you live in Washington. Oh, you can get here in like 2 months." Like at that point, they've already hired somebody else.
Right. And so this is your first job in entertainment.
Yeah, it's my first job in the entertainment industry.
So as an assistant for the producer of Scare Tactics?
Yeah, the assistant to the 2 creators of it. They were like a writing team at the time.
Wow. And what was that like for you?
I mean, it was wild. It was because it was like, I mean, I grew up in a small town, not around like famous people. So, and they were very kind, and they like understood that I was very green and like fresh off the bus or whatever. But they were very kind about like letting me sit in on pitch meetings. So it's like, I remember like, my second week there, they were taking a pitch from like Louis Anderson, who I loved Life with Louis growing up,
Yeah.
Or like one of the stars of like the Drew Carey show, which I loved. And it's like, I remember having like such an awkward conversation. Like maybe it was like my second week on the job where they were doing a pitch or a catch up meeting with like one of the leads on the Drew Carey show, not Drew Carey, but I think Harlan Williams or something like that.
Oh, cool.
And like I I asked him if he wanted any coffee or anything, got coffee for him. He like went with me to the kitchen just because he like wanted to see if there were like snacks or something like that. And I was just like, hey, like, just weird question, but are you like on TV or how do you know them? Because I was like a little starstruck. And he was like, oh no, I was just their janitor for a while. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, but it's like, your first time that you've like seen somebody or like interacted with somebody that you like saw on TV growing up, I think for people it's like such a starstruck,
For
like,
sure.
you came out of my TV and now I'm validating your parking. There's like
Right.
a magic to it that
There is.
that you hopefully get over quickly if you are in the entertainment industry.
Yes, I remember going on the Universal tour in the Universal Studios, like Hollywood tour that they have in middle school. And that's where you are like on those trams
Yeah.
and they take you around. And I remember there's like an old set of like Dante's Peak.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
it's
like
so
the
fun.
volcano movie. And
Yeah.
it's like this miniature. And that was huge. And I don't even know if I was like even interested in, writing. I was really drawing a lot, but just seeing how movies were made was a big deal.
Right. Yeah, I think it's like because especially when you grow up not in the industry, it's like if somebody were to ask you how The Simpsons or, like The Office or whatever is made, you'd say like magic. Like, and there is just this, I think, special feeling when you're like on a real set for the first time and like seeing real actors and seeing, people that you watched growing up, like sing drunk karaoke at a bar in Burbank. It's like, it is very, there is just something like beautiful about that in this industry that I think when you're like young, it just like takes getting used to, because you can't walk into every single job or meeting with like wide-eyed, like, wow.
Right.
I mean, hopefully you have that a little bit, but it's like,
Right.
at a certain point, I don't want to say it wears off, but you get used to it. But like, I think that is kind of things that remind you of like, oh, that's like why you like love this place,
Yes. Now, being at your first job like this, are they aware of your like, ambitions in comedy and writing, or how much do they know about you and what you want to do?
So that's something that's really, I'm not sure if you experienced that, but this is something that's like so interesting when you were fresh out of college, moving to Los Angeles, wanting to work in the entertainment industry, is that a lot of people, when you interview to be an assistant, if you say you want to be a writer, they will not hire you. It is just kind of this like weird thing that I experienced a lot in my assistant interviews of like, I remember I like interviewed to be a writer's PA on a big like a ABC Family sitcom at the time or something like that. And I got really far to the point, had like several interviews with like the production coordinator, like the office manager, and etc. And it got to the point where they literally had like a nickname for me already in the office. It was just like Little Joey or something, because I was, like 24 at the time or something.
Right.
And then when they invited me to the writer's room to meet like the showrunner of the show, she asked me a couple questions about the set myself. And one of the questions that she asked was like, oh, like, what do you want to do? And I was like, oh yeah, I want to, I want to be a writer eventually. And the look on her face like dropped and dropped to like, oh, well, thanks for coming. And then I did not get the job. But
What are you supposed to say? Like production manager? Or I'd really love to be a production accountant. It's like, oh, great, he's going to be here for a long time.
Yeah, I remember there was like, I interviewed for this one assistant job for this other company where I told them that I like, oh, on the side, I like do improv at UCB or whatever. And he was like, what's stopping you from leaving after 2 weeks to go on an improv tour and leaving me high and dry? And I'm like, I moved here a year ago. The shows that I do are for free and at midnight. I'm not like, also improv doesn't tour, like, so I was fortunate in my first job that I was very, honest that I did a lot of college TV stuff and really wanted to work in comedy and like, that I wanted to be a writer and all that stuff. And they were like really cool about it. They cool about it to the point that like, they said like, oh, well, the new season of Scare Tactics is going to start up really soon. If you want to, just like sit in on writers meetings, like let us know. Or like, if you have ideas, send us ideas. So I was able to like, within my first 6 months of Los Angeles, like write bits that they filmed for Scare Tactics and jokes for Tracy Morgan and stuff like that.
That's cool.
You
That's
know?
cool. I feel like there's sometimes two kinds of people that you can work for, which are the people that, bring you in and like say, oh, let's expose you to that if that's what you want to do. And then there's the people that want you to fall in line and just don't be too ambitious and don't say what you really want to do. I just need someone at this time, and they don't want to.
I need you to be my assistant forever, and if you leave in 10 years, how dare you? Like,
right. Well, that's cool that they were so like they lifted you like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was to the point, like, I really owe them a lot because when I was their assistant for about 10 months and then just like their shows kind of went away. So they just didn't really need an assistant anymore. But a year after that, one of the creators of Scare Tactics, Scott Halleck, really funny guy, really fantastic writer. We were just friends on Facebook, and he just saw that I was posting about like doing sketch comedy shows around town. And he, just sent me a text and was just like, hey, if you're looking for writing work, I got a new show starting up. And he like brought me in and was like, oh, if you want to be like a junior writer, like you're hired. So he like, within 2 years of Los Angeles, he hired me for my first writing job.
What was that show?
So it was a show called, I want to say it was called World's Deadliest. It was like a National Geographic, a series of National Geographic specials where they brought in Scott Halleck as a comedy guy because they wanted them to be like kind of funny. So it was basically like a nature documentary with like jokes,
Right. That sounds kind of cool. What kind of comedy did you write for that kind of show?
So it was a lot of just like, I can't even remember any specific jokes, but it's just like,
is it for the narration or is it like how they're editing clips?
A little bit of both.
Huh.
It was just, I can't remember any specific jokes, but it's just like, you can describe how fast a cheetah runs in a way where it's a joke.
Okay.
So it's like, a cheetah can run really fast. Like, that's, I bet that your mother-in-law can't outrun that. Or that's like the hackiest version of that, but it's like shit like that.
Right.
And then they just like liked me around the office. So they started thinking it would be really funny if they shot recreations for it, where it's one recreation actor and he gets mauled at the end of every recreation video, but he's like still hurt from the previous recreation videos. So we did so I was like the one recreation actor as like a joke for like every recreation, and like it's like I think like it's like the first one I'm like looking in my garbage and then I get mauled by a bobcat, and then the next one I'm like on the beach trying to pick up a blue ring octopus, but my arm's in a sling from when I got mauled by a bobcat. So it's like we were able to like do bits that made it on the show.
That's really cool.
Yeah, no, it was just genuinely like for a 2 years in a Los Angeles job that paid me like, a good rate for that. And like them taking such a chance on just like somebody who was their assistant a year beforehand at that point had just been doing like improv in the LA improv scene, it was just like, it was a very like looking back on it, a very cool thing for them to do. And I really learned a lot from the process.
Yeah. And so at this time you're kind of living the life of being here in Los Angeles, supporting yourself, doing sketch comedy, improv. How are you liking that time in your life? How do you look back on it, that time in the city? Like, did you kind of feel like you were coming into your own? Were you, what was your comfort level like?
Yeah, I mean, it was like, I think that it probably took me about 2.5 to 3 years before I really learned to like living in Los Angeles. Because, I grew up in a small town. I think that a lot of living in Los Angeles for me kind of had that feel of when I was in community college, driving, 90 minutes out of the way to do, bad open mics in Seattle or whatever, where it's like, especially living in Inglewood and with so many of my things in Hollywood and Studio City, it was like, to go to a sketch comedy writing class was like a hour and 15-minute drive across the city, and, so it was definitely like a grind, and it was definitely like, being in the trenches, doing a lot of like comedy bit shows at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in front of 4 drunk people or whatever,
Yeah.
But it was also like beautiful. Like while I was between gigs for a little while, and I was just, unemployed looking for work and taking, an unemployment EDD check. And I remember like literally I had like a routine for a couple months where I would like do this sketch comedy show at UCB that would get out at like 2 a.m. every Saturday morning. In the green room after I did my sketch, probably still in costume, I would fill out my unemployment form. And then before I went to my car, would walk over to a mailbox next to UCB and put it in there and then get in my car and drive home, And it's like, the friends that I made doing that are, some of my best friends in the city, and they're also some of my favorite like coworkers in writing. Those are the people that I like. I say this a lot to people who are like newer in their careers, is like, if you do something like that, some sort of creative thing that's a struggle and hard to do, like the people that I did those shows with are the people that like gave me animation writing jobs 6 years later and that I hired for things, 5 years after that or whatever. It's like, it is sort of like that's when you're building your community of people who you link arms with and raise up together. So it's like, yeah, in some ways it sucked, but it was also like beautiful to get to do that.
Absolutely. And so that was my question of when did you start to gravitate towards animation or feel the pull of that? Was it other people that were working in that eventually, and you kind of stayed in touch and got to send your samples, or how did that kind of come about?
So I mean, I grew up. I think that with a lot of this stuff, like I think a theme for a lot of my career is having something that I want to do be so obvious that it's literally punching me in the face. And then it's not until like the 10th punch that I'm like, oh, maybe that's the thing that I want to do. So for animation, it's like my favorite shows growing up were The Simpsons, Family Guy. Like my style of writing is very cartoonish and animation friendly. All of the jokes that I have are very big and animation centric. Even when I was doing stand up, they were all like, the type of things you can really only see in animation. So I was on a sketch comedy group at a place called the Pack Theater, which is one of the comedy theaters in Los Angeles. And the group kind of formed out of a sketch comedy class that I took. And one of the guys on the sketch group, his name's Eric Kuska. He's a fantastic animator and a super funny sketch comedian and a really great puppeteer. He, at the time, was an animator for Fuzzy Door, working on shows like American Dad and Family Guy. And he, on the side, had sold and was developing a relaunch of Looney Tunes to Warner Brothers and Cartoon Network. And he was making the pilot for it, which was like, essentially an animated Bugs Bunny short. And he would just bring this animatic to sketch meetings and show it to us in the sketch group and say, like, it would be like, after we'd done reading everybody's sketches, he'd say like, hey, if anybody wants to stick around, like, I'd love like joke pitches that you have on this Bugs Bunny short. And like, of course, everybody was like, yeah, of course I'll stick around and like give you notes on this Bugs Bunny short that like is canon Bugs Bunny stuff, So, I did that, and he, fortunately the show got greenlit. It's called New Looney Tunes. I think you can watch it on like Max or something like that. It's a super fun show. And it's just like classic 7-minute Looney Tunes shorts, starring Bugs Bunny. So the show got greenlit. He was the showrunner, and he just thought I was funny and liked me on the sketch group. So he was like, hey, do you want to like write on this? And I was like, oh, of course I would love a job. Also being able to write character name Bugs Bunny, line of dialogue, what's up, Doc, and like mean it,
Right. And written by your name on the script cover page?
Yeah, on the script cover page, like literally like having a screen grab where it's like story by Joey Clift with like Bugs Bunny leering over a package or something like that. And and also just having conversations with him, in his office when I'm writing on the show about like, conversations that he'd had with original Looney Tunes animators about like their philosophies toward like comedy, and, that for me is like a comedy nerd who grew up being like raised by animation. It was just like such a great experience. And like that, as often happens in the entertainment industry, led to like, especially being involved in the Los Angeles comedy scene, like, a friend of mine was writing on a bunch of DreamWorks web series starring like Shrek and Kung Fu Panda and stuff like that. And she wrapped up on the job, but her seat was open, and she just like was looking for people in the Los Angeles comedy scene to like kind of take her seat. And she like knew me as like nice guy in the LA sketch improv comedy scene that had animation experience. So she brought me on for that. And then all of a sudden I've had a couple of animation credits. So that led to more jobs and more jobs and more jobs,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so at this moment, like before you get that Bugs Bunny break, so to speak, was there a moment when you were, an assistant and you were doing like the 2 a.m., improv nights and all that stuff where you were just kind of, got hit with those bouts of uncertainty of like, ooh, is this really gonna, or is this ever gonna pay off for me, or, anything like that? Or have you always been kind of like just forward optimistic? Like figure it out kind of?
I mean, I wouldn't say optimism is probably not the right word, but I think it's just, I think at the time it was like, well, I don't have a plan B, you know? So like, you know, and I think that it's also, it's different when you're in your 20s where it's sort of like, well, like, I don't really have a plan B, but I'm able to pay my bills. I'm not making a lot of money, but like I'm, you know, keeping a roof over my head. I'm not in crippling debt or whatever, you know. I am able to afford taking these comedy classes, and you know, it's like there were definitely feelings, especially the first year or two, of like, oh, maybe I do want to go back to news. Maybe that seems more stable, especially because a lot of my friends from college had, you know, gone and become reporters in small towns, and I saw like, oh, you're like actually doing stuff and not
Yep.
just doing improv jams in front of nobody, you know, like
Reporting the news in front of 4 drunk people. And, you know,
yeah, for sure. Doing those reporter open mics.
Right.
Yeah, it's so you know, yeah, there were definitely moments of like thought of like, oh, maybe I should go back and pursue news more as a career. But, you know, I think that I fortunately kept on getting just enough positive reinforcement to keep going.
Yeah.
And that positive reinforcement could be, you know, like writing for a Bugs Bunny show, or it could just be like a friend I'm on an improv group with got me a job as an assistant at an internet startup that didn't require a lot of work. So I was able to like hang out in the office and make sketch comedy props for 6 hours a day, you know, like,
Yeah.
and it's just like those kinds of things, jobs and opportunities that some of them might not necessarily even be like industry related, but it just like keeps keeps you able to pay your car payment or whatever. You know?
Right. And in terms of like that positive reinforcement, especially when you're in your 20s, you don't need much, right?
Yeah.
Like I remember I would always look back at the previous year and be like, well, you know, I'm an intern this year, and last year I was just looking, and you know, like any sort of progress I would use as justification to continue.
Oh yeah, I still do that now, where it's like,
same actually.
Yeah, where it's not necessarily justification to continue of like, should I like go be an accountant?
You can still be a weatherman.
Yeah,
Joey.
but it's like, but it is, yeah. Like I was literally talking with my girlfriend about this a few days ago about like, I try to look at every year as like, in what ways was this year better than the previous year? And, you know, in some time, like the year that I was writing on that Looney Tunes show, it was like, oh yeah, this is the best year that I've had because I'm writing on this Looney Tunes show and making, you know, a good like union rate writing for this.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. And then the following year, you know, I had like 2 years between that and when I wrote for the DreamWorks stuff. So like that year between, I like got a job writing for like a bunch of comedy websites. And it's like, okay, so I'm not looking at like progress in my animation career as the thing to judge this year by, but I made a bunch of viral comedy things that I'm proud of that like got millions of views and made the news all over the place. Or like, oh, my show that I wrote for UCB got a run, and now I've got a run at one of the coolest comedy theaters in the city. And like, that's not necessarily paying money, but it like is a sign of progress.
And it's something new, and you're a sign of you're pushing yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
And the viral comedy clips, are you talking about the short animated clips like involving a bear? And
oh yeah, we could talk about that more in a sec. This was honestly even pre that of like I was on a sketch comedy group with a couple of friends, and this was around when Kanye West was only a little problematic.
Okay.
So when he released an album called Jesus, if you're not familiar, which is an album where basically the theme of the album is he thinks he's Jesus. So we thought it would be funny to do a complete parody of that album, literally parodying every single song, where instead of him thinking that he's Jesus, he thinks he's Santa Claus. So instead of it being called Jesus, it was called Creasus, you know?
Oh.
And it was like every song, it was like instead of Black Skinhead, it was Red Hat Head. Instead of I Am a God, it's I Am a Claus.
So are you recording this?
Yeah.
And this is drawing on your old musician talents back in the day.
Because I sort of like, just to backtrack a little bit, like when I was in high school, I like thought I was going to be a rapper, you know, I went through that phase and that there was a period kind of in that year off between high school and community college where I like would write rap lyrics for 2 hours every day, and they were all bad, but like it still just gave me a familiarity with like using a rhyme dictionary. So that is something that, fast forward to 10 years later or whatever, when I'm tasked with writing a parody of Kanye West's I'm in It, but instead of being called I'm in It, it's called I'm in It, parentheses, the chimney. like it's,
I love that.
Yeah. It's just like, it's building a skill set that you did not realize would pay off.
Absolutely. And it's still within your voice of being a comedian.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we made that. It was Kanye West was voiced by a guy named Carl Tart, who's a super funny comedian. He's a writer for Saturday Night Live right now and really known in the podcast space. And he's just a guy that I wrote on a Second City show with in 2011, and this came out in 2014 and it went crazy viral. It was featured by the Washington Post, MTV, Billboard wrote an article about it. And that was my first time really making something that was truly this is viral. It got several million listens within a day,
Wow. And approximately what year is this? What year is
Yeezus came out in, I think, 2013. We released this 3 days before Christmas in 2014, so about 10 years ago.
3 days before Christmas. I love that.
Yeah, because it's a Christmas album.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing where 2015 was maybe not the best career year in terms of things progress as far as animation writing goes or whatever. But I had this crazy viral hit, and that led to a bunch of jobs writing for comedy websites and a lot of generals with places like Funny or Die and other places. And it's just that one, it was a really great lesson in promotion and marketing, how to generate something that's viral, watching very specifically how that developed an audience. It's not we posted it online and then within 5 minutes it had 1 million views. It was we posted it online and then it got picked up by the Kanye West subreddit, and then it got to the top of that, and then from there the hip hop subreddit saw it, and then somebody posted it there, and then it went viral there, and then from there a small blog wrote about it, and then a medium-sized website that follows the small blog wrote about it, and then a big Billboard or whatever reads the medium blog, and then the Washington Post reads Billboard, and it's sort of seeing how things travel on the internet, and that's something that has really helped influence a lot of my work with things like that short that I mentioned of how to I hate to say generate a viral hit, but how to develop a fan base online and how to create buzz for something. Literally with that, the reason that we parodied the whole album and not just one song is the conversation we had is what is the BuzzFeed headline? The BuzzFeed headline is not these people parodied this one Kanye West song. The BuzzFeed headline is these people parodied the entire Yeezus album and turned it into a Christmas album, and so it just taught me a lot of lessons about that I've kind of continued into, even writing for animation and just how to promote different episodes that I write are sort of how will this episode of this show get shared places outside of just the fan base of the episode of the show,
Okay. So, and how are people watching or listening to this album? Was it a YouTube link and you just posted? It was 60 minutes of music, or
so we did a SoundCloud and then also a YouTube channel. So so it was mostly SoundCloud, and then we also had a YouTube channel for the sketch group that we posted it 2 places, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But I would say mostly it was they both kind of got shared different places. So some news outlets shared the YouTube channel, and it was a YouTube playlist.
Yes.
So each track was a song. Then some places shared the SoundCloud link.
Okay. So on that subject of, you were talking about how you think about that sometimes in terms of the animation episodes that you write. And what came to my mind was, forgive me, the episode title, is it Not Your
Possum Mascot?
Yes, because you had written that a couple of years ago now, and that's pinned on your Twitter / X, or it was at the time. And I went back and revisited the episode, but I remember when it first came out and you posted about that, and that was how I found out just about that episode. It was
thanks.
You tweeted that you couldn't believe that you got to spend network time to talk about this issue. So is that something in line with what you're talking about? Was in the back of your mind of I want to make this point, but also this is kind of clippable, or
100%. Yeah, it is sort of I think that especially like I would say that I came up through like the live comedy space into the online comedy space into animation writing. Not a completely clean path, but kind of like that's sort of the rough trajectory of my career. And yeah, that was definitely something where I was like the scene that I posted on social media of like the kids who were native being confronted by a bunch of non-natives in fake headdresses.
Chad, Brad.
Yeah, Chad, Brad, and Shad, I think.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And we should say this is for Spirit Rangers.
Yeah, Spirit Rangers. Spirit Rangers on Netflix. We were nominated for 10 Emmy Awards. Go watch it. It's great. Yeah, so that was definitely when I was writing that scene, I was doing with the attitude of trying to capture how awkward that experience is, but also with an idea of like, oh yeah, that's like that scene will probably go viral.
Absolutely. And did it?
Yeah, I mean, it's got like I've posted it on like I that was sort of in my consulting producer role on Spirit Rangers. A lot of conversations that I had with Netflix of just like make sure that you post this episode on social media, or like make sure that like this clip should be posted places.
Yeah.
And it's got probably like millions of views various places, and it is something that like comes up a lot in interviews and articles, and it's something that like it's sort of like. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about. Like the high school that I went to had like a racist Native mascot, and it's something that and the episode is kind of loosely based on the experiences of myself and other Native students feeling weird about it and not really being listened to, but like still kind of speaking up. And so there was like a lot of truth in that, like, oh, this is kind of based on like something that I'm passionate about, also a very real thing that a lot of Native folks are fighting against, which is just, weird Native sports mascots and stuff like that. But also like, oh, this is like a buzzy topic that I'm asked about a lot. Like, how do you feel about the Atlanta Braves? So to me, it kind of felt like, oh, you do the math of like, this is clearly something that people are interested in, and it's also never been tackled in the kid space. So if you tackle that like well, in a way that's concise, like people will be excited about that,
Well, that's the thing, is because your other work that I've seen, which is so funny, and it's and you'll have to help me with the title, about the bear.
Oh yeah. Telling people you're Native American when you're not Native is a lot like telling a bear you're a bear when you're not a bear.
Right.
When I came up with that title, I did not know I was going to have to say it very much.
Right. Every single podcast you say.
Yeah. It's 24 words long.
Yeah. And your other work there, including my first Native boyfriend.
Yeah.
And so what I'm kind of gathering from just hearing your growth as an artist is, it's there's a point to make, but you're never not funny.
Oh,
and it's
thanks.
always entertaining. And so even if it's a short film that's not for kids, or if it's a kid show, there's that consistency, is you're saying something of substance, but you're still, it never feels like someone's going to turn it off because, they're like, oh, this is, triggering a reaction in me. And this is, it's funny, and you can laugh with it and see the irony. And so I just think that that's great. And so is that something that you think about, like in terms of your own voice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like you and I met because I was a writer on Kokomo Lane, which is a fantastic show.
Thank you.
Everybody should watch. It's great.
Yes.
And like even Kokomo Lane, which is a show for a very young audience, like all of the episodes, like I wrote an episode about the first time that one of the characters had ever pet a cat. And like when I came up with the episode pitch for that, I was like I was basically thinking about like, oh, I love cats. When I was a kid, I always wanted to pet a cat, but I was get so excited when I would see a cat that I would literally scream. Like if a cat walked close to me, I would literally scream with excitement, and the cat would run away because it's an animal and I'm a child bigger than it screaming at it, And it's like the truth of that, I think one is funny, like,
yes.
And two, it's like, oh, it's me bringing like something really personal to, like I'm not a 2-year-old, but I feel like that is like there's a universal truth to that experience that I think a lot of people could relate to, and that you could translate into a story like that. So it's like trying to put yourself into it, even for like things like kid shows, of like, is this story personal to you? Is there like some personal emotion or thing from your life that you can pull from that's like true that you could like put into this, or is there a joke that you like actually find funny as an adult, and that and it's like, you maybe can't do the adult version of it for a kid's show, but you can find, and this is just the benefit of doing a lot of comedy, is like you can find like the DNA strands of what that joke is and what that joke's about, and then just like change some specifics so it's more kid friendly or whatever, you know?
Yeah, so that's really consistent with what you talked about with that comedian and the Lenny Kravitz joke, where it was like, it was all made up
Yeah.
in terms of his case. But with you, you're looking for that kernel of truth to
Yeah.
then build either a story around, a short film, something that at least comes from somewhere, authentic.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important. Like I was talking to a friend about this recently about, writing for kids TV. It's like, it's just like, I mean, you're a storyteller because you probably have something to say, right? And like, I think that it's important when you're like writing for, even these like huge brands where it feels like kind of everything has been said in that space of just like, yeah, but like about this script, about this story, like what do you care about? And that could be just a joke that you think is really funny. That could be, the storyline is based on an experience that you had as a kid or one of your friends had or something like that. Or just like, a lesson that you wished that you learned as a kid. Like I feel like when I'm writing for kids TV, I'm like writing to myself as a kid, if that makes sense. Or like what's something that like would have helped me when I was 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 or whatever. And, I think that comes through in the script and in the final product, right?
Yeah, I think that's something, yes, as storytellers, there is something that you feel like you have to say. But I think for a lot of people, or at least starting out, it starts as something that you have to get out.
Oh,
and
yeah,
it kind
for
of
sure,
comes
for
out
sure.
messy.
Yeah.
And you're just like, but this kind of feels like the right direction for me. And then at some point you start to develop a voice or a point of view. And then, not everything you do is that, but it kind
for
of,
sure.
supports a lot of that, like, those kinds of projects.
Yeah, well, that's something that, and this is probably a good thing to talk about as a good sort of bridge between, writing, doing that Kanye West thing and then also doing this like very native specific stuff is like when I first moved to Los Angeles and when I was first doing comedy, like the joke that I had about like, oh, if I have kids, I want to irradiate them so they'll be superheroes or whatever, is like, I feel like I didn't really know. I feel like I didn't really know what my point of view was. I just knew what I thought was funny. And I mean, I remember like, I didn't write my first piece of native comedy or focused on my identity until like 2018,
Yeah.
And a lot of that was, like, I mean, I grew up on a reservation. I went to powwows growing up. I'm like an enrolled member of a tribe and I'm really passionate about my culture, but I just didn't know how to tackle that in comedy. And also because there weren't any other native comedians in sort of the circles that I was in at the time, I didn't think that I could bring like a sketch about like powwows or whatever to a sketch meeting because there aren't like other native people who like know what that is,
Right.
So, I was kind of just in the arms race of trying to write the funniest sketch about Spider-Man, which is what everybody was doing at the time,
Right.
And it wasn't until like, I think like I started to realize it was around 2018 that like I was one of few native comedians sort of getting these kind of mainstream opportunities that like, not only should I, talk about my identity more, but also I like need to, and that is kind of when I started sort of dabbling in that kind of thing. Like I wrote like a zine that came out in 2018 called like the American Indian Ready to Wear Catalog, which is basically like a satire fashion catalog that where like all of the models were like Pocahontas, and it was just like, and it's like all the clothes items were like a brown dress because though she might be able to hear all of the colors of the wind, the only dress color she have is brown, or like the crying Indian from those old PSAs, and it was just like tears for the environment because if you're native and because if you don't cry when you see garbage, are you really native? And I released that and got just a lot of really positive feedback in a way that I had not gotten previously with, though I'd made stuff that's gone viral or whatever, this was like a different kind of thing where it's just like all of a sudden, like, musicians that I was a fan of growing up were like sharing this on Twitter, all of a sudden, like people in the comedy scene were like inviting me on big podcasts because they were like, oh, you're not just insert sketch comedian trying to write the funniest Donald Trump has small hands joke or whatever,
Right.
It's like, oh, you're bringing something like new to the table that we haven't seen before. And then I made the Bear animated short sort of as you know, an extension of like, oh, I just like making native comedy stuff, and then that went viral and blew up and became a Comedy Central digital series and all that. And you know, and it also just kind of felt like when I was screening that short in film festivals, natives and non-natives would come up to me after screenings and like thank me for something that voiced an annoyance and a microaggression they'd experienced for their whole lives. Or if they're non-native, just like, wow, I never really knew that it was wrong to tell people you're native when you're not native or whatever, you know. Thank you for educating me about that. And it's like, I'm not getting that kind of feedback on a Kanye West Christmas album. People are just like, oh, that's funny, and then they'll forget about it 2 months later, you know?
True, although in the case of that Kanye West album, I think there is something deeper there, which is he's comparing himself to God, and you're doing the, just swapping in Santa Claus.
For sure.
And there's an element of like, isn't this ridiculous?
Well, that's
so there's a little bit of like,
I mean, that's probably a bad example because like that is a weird. The Kanye West album is. So like the Kanye West album, that is something that like it came out like 10 years ago. And it still pops up on like best parody album of all time lists, which is like nuts.
That's amazing.
But like, you know, a random sketch comedy video that I wrote about like Lord of the Rings, they sure do walk far or whatever, you know. It's like there's some stuff like that that's just kind of like disposable clickbaity comedy. And it's like nobody, like I remember when I was writing for one of these comedy websites, I wrote a clickbait comedy article that got 60 million views, which is about as many people as like watch the Super Bowl every year. And I think that the title of it was just like, when you accidentally text your dad when you think you're texting your boyfriend or whatever. And it was just a series of like text messages of like that, of people being like, what? I'm your dad, not your boyfriend or whatever. You know, I wrote it in 6 minutes and it just was clickbaity enough to get a ton of views. But I guarantee that everybody who read that forgot about it 15 seconds afterwards, you know?
Sure.
Whereas like, you know, this bear short that I made, it's like, which is coming from a very personal place, and you know, I just stand behind it as funny and I'm really proud of it. And it's like my voice distilled in like a 2-minute thing. Like there are people that, you know, I made that in 2018, it came out in 2019, that like that still goes viral on TikTok. People will still post it on TikTok and it'll get 1 million views here or there, you know. I still get interviewed by like big news out. Like I've been interviewed by like NPR about that, you know. It's like people still, you know, like 6 years after it came out, still care and are passionate about it and are still like thanking me for making this thing. And it's like, that is kind of what to me is like, and it's something that like you learn over time is like, oh, it's more important to make like the more personal that your work, the more it's going to stick with people, because you're probably not the only person who feels the same way about something as other people, you know?
Mm-hmm. And it's still a conflict, so to speak, in the culture. I mean, just look at the Super Bowl this past, right?
Yeah,
like
literally,
you know, it's not, and so it's something that still that persists. And
yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, I have to just like ask you because I don't know this, but somewhere maybe when you were younger or older, when did Garfield come into the picture? Because the first time I saw you like on social media, I was, okay, you're wearing a cat suit. This is and Garfield. And so I was like, okay, where did this and now for people who can't see.
I'm wearing a Garfield cardigan.
Yes. Just, as soon as you got out of your car, I was like, oh, that's awesome. So where did that come in?
Oh, okay. So Garfield is such a weird case for me where like my two loves when I was growing up were cats and the color orange when I was like 6 years old. And I remember going to a Scholastic book fair on the res and seeing a Garfield Fat Cat 3-pack and seeing that Garfield was my two favorite things, a cat and also my favorite color, and begging my mom to buy this Garfield book for me. And, you know, probably reading the book 100 times after she got it for me. And, you know, loving Garfield Friends, the series growing up. And then, you know, he kind of made this switch for me where like once I, you know, entered more of a proper, you know, career in comedy, he kind of became like mainstream comedy where it's like, oh, something I pushed against. It was more fun to make fun of Garfield than it was to like actually read Garfield. So like I would do stuff like I did a social media campaign where I was like, if my if I get this many Twitter followers, I'll film myself eating lasagna with my bare hands like Garfield.
I think I remember that.
Yeah. And this was like early pandemic, and I covered I got it within, I thought I was going to get it within 3 months, but I got it within like 12 hours. So I was like, okay, I'm going to spend $200 on Olive Garden lasagna and like put a tarp in my kitchen. Literally, like once I was done, I threw those clothes away. My hair smelled like lasagna for like 2 days afterwards. And then I think that there was a switch where, because I posted about Garfield so much, people started to associate me with him and like give me, gifts and stuff like that, like Garfield t-shirts and stuff. And like, I remember there was my grandma passed away a couple of years ago, and when my uncle mailed me a box of some of her old things to remember her by, at like the top of that package was a small Garfield figurine that was absolutely infused with the smell of cigarette smoke. I mean, she must have had it since the 70s, I was on a live NPR show a year or two ago that recorded in Portland, and after the recording, somebody from the audience who follows me on social media gave me like a Garfield ribbon shirt that she'd sewn for me. This cardigan my girlfriend gave me as a gift. And it's like, now I've kind of switched to where like I loved Garfield genuinely as a kid, kind of ironically in my 20s. And now it's like I respect him as like this glue that like really brings a lot of people together. Like, my attitude toward entertainment is that basically we're creating communal experiences to bring people closer together and help people relate. And like, it would be really hard to find somebody in this country who doesn't have some small like memory associated with Garfield, or like some, like fond memory of like reading a Garfield comic strip or whatever, or even just like their uncle had like a Garfield like suction cup thing on the back of their car or whatever.
Well, yeah. Well, I was the kid who I like would go to the library and I read all those books.
Great.
The Fat Cat, the 3-pack,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
just all the little singles by Jim Davis. So that was like one of the first authors I ever knew about.
Yeah.
And it was like reading, but like, it was comics. So it was like reading drawing. So it was like, I just devoured it.
Yeah.
And then I was at my parents' house this past weekend with my daughter, and in my old closet there were some Garfield comics, and I knew like, I'm gonna be talking to Joey like, next week. And then I'm like, I need to just take these home and put it on her bookshelf so just she could like get exposed to Garfield. And so it was just like you said, it's a communal thing, and it's like
monoculture,
right?
And it's like, and I think that for me, it's like realizing, especially as I've gotten older, that's like beautiful, and it is like, so I think that I am, though I've kind of bridged the entire gap of types of Garfield fans. And now I'm just in this spot where it's like, oh yeah, like, when the Los Angeles fires happened recently, a nonprofit was selling a Los Angeles hat that had LA in big letters, and then after that, Zanya, so it's lasagna.
Oh, that's
and then
great.
there's like a small orange Garfield on the side of it. And within like maybe like 24 hours, probably like 50 people DM'd that to me or texted that to me. And I, of course, had to buy it, but I'm like, oh, that's like how people show love for me. And that's like cool,
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's
it's just like beautiful. So it's like, I
love that.
Love that Garf.
Yes. Okay. Well, I ask everybody this. This is called the rule I break. So
you're going to say, you ask everybody about this. What's your relationship with Garfield?
Yeah. Have you ever eaten lasagna on, no.
Brother, I only eat lasagna.
Yeah. So every industry has its rules, and some are there for a reason, and some are they're just begging to be broken. And so what's a rule in your field that you don't follow or don't believe in?
So I think that a rule that I don't believe in is, and I think this is probably like a lot of people will tell you that there's a specific way to develop a career in the entertainment industry, or you're an assistant, but you want to make a short film or something. You're not ready. So I think that that is something where it's important to like not look for permission or other people's validation before you make the thing you want to make. That bear short that I made that like there were people that I like sent that script to that were like, don't make this, and just because they like didn't get it or whatever. And then I like trusted my gut and I made it. And I like have a friend who's an animator who I like brought on to do the animation for it. And now that's like such a big success that's led to, partnerships with Comedy Central and like international news coverage. And I've gotten jobs off of it. So it's like, I think don't ask for permission. And if you think that something is a good idea, like don't wait for somebody's validation. Do it. Like make the thing because, ultimately you have the most important validation is your validation and not somebody else in the comedy scene who maybe thinks you're funny or maybe doesn't think you're funny or a writing teacher or whatever. And yeah, like learn process and be nice and be chill. But if like you think something is a good idea and somebody thinks that you're not ready for it, but you think you're ready for it, like take the swing.
That's great. I like to end everything with a rapid fire.
Oh, okay. Oh no!
5 questions.
Oh, put that gun down.
And you can answer as much or as little as you want. But what was the last book you read?
The last book that I read was, I want to say I'm doing a little bit of a research for a project. I think I read like America the Book, the Daily Show fake history book.
Cool.
Yeah, it's great. It's super funny.
Cool.
Yeah, that was less of a pleasure read, more of a just like research read. But,
Nice.
But it's great.
A movie you love rewatching?
A movie I love rewatching, I would say Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, the second Bill and Ted movie. That I think I owe that movie like 50% of my personality. And what I love about it is it's just about 2 guys who are like deeply positive about the world succeeding and saving the day,
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice I've ever received. Probably, so this advice I got from a stand-up comedian at my college that I just asked very dorky comedy advice to. And he said, if you're going to be a monkey, be a gorilla. And what he meant by that was like, if you have a dream, follow that dream. Like, don't be timid about that stuff. Like, if you want to be a comedian, try to be the best. Like, and I think that's something that's, I've tried to remember throughout a lot of my, in the decades since then or whatever.
Worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Worst piece of advice I've ever received was there was a podcast idea that I had in 2016 called 25 Minutes of Silence, where the premise was that a guest and I just sat in silence for 25 minutes. And I told one of my friends about it. Like I sent him a text of like, I'm thinking about doing this podcast called 25 Minutes of Silence or whatever. And he literally called me and said, that is the worst idea I've ever heard in my life. Don't do it. And, I was like, 1, ouch. Like, and 2, like, no, I think this is funny. I'm going to do it anyway. And I like did it and it like went crazy viral. And I got like a lot of, like guests that it's insane that they agreed to be on this show where we literally just sat quietly for 25 minutes. And then it led to Bob Zamuda, Andy Kaufman's head writer, getting an email from his assistant saying, hey, Bob Zamuda just wants you to know that he thinks this is very funny.
See, I'm over here cracking up. As soon as you told me that and knowing you, I'm like, that's hilarious.
Thanks. Yeah.
I love that.
So it's like, trust your gut,
Yes. Last one. If it wasn't this, and maybe I know the answer from talking to you, but what's another career field you could see yourself in? Would it be weatherman?
Okay, so the weatherman, maybe. I'm going to say another career field is probably like, I don't know, like I'm really proud of my tribe. We have a really nice casino resort that we just opened like 20 minutes north of Portland. So probably just like being like a marketing exec for my tribe's casino,
I love that. Where can people find you or find your work?
Oh, great. Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter/X, Blue Sky, and TikTok at Joeytainment. And then you can find me on Instagram and Threads at Joey Clift with 5 or 6 eyes. The reason for that's a 12-year-old took Joey Clift with 1 eye, so I just have to deal. And you can check out more of my work at joeyclift.com, and you can watch my entire all of my animated shorts on a website called gonenative.tv. The series is called Gone Native, and you should check it out.
This was such a pleasure just talking to you and getting to know you more than we've ever really done in the past.
Yeah.
This was Joey. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.